The rules governing working while you're studying in Canada is not as simple as you think. Many people know that you can probably work full time during the school break or part time while you're actively studying, but it's not as simple as that. There are so many different scenarios that, based on those scenarios, the decisions that you're making in terms of your working abilities off campus or on the campus of the school could change. I recently delivered a presentation for a group of licensed immigration consultants about the options of working while you're studying in Canada. And I also have written articles. I post the links to the articles below this video, and you can also watch that presentation right after this recording. I hope you enjoyed that presentation as well. And if you have any questions, by all means, please book a consultation session with me, and I happily answer your questions. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about working while studying in Canada. Most of the focus will be off-campus working in Canada, but I will also talk about on the campus working as well. So without further ado, let's take a look at the slides. So I have used these resources for this presentation. The first one is the program delivery instruction by IRCC for the immigration officers. And then we also talk about working while studying. I have an article about this on settler.ca, and we will present 10 scenarios. I also have another article that explored those 10 scenarios. In terms of working on the campus, Section 186, or to be more specific, subsection F of Section 186 of the immigration regulations talks about who can work on the campus. And according to this section, a foreign national may work in Canada without a work permit if they are a full-time student on the campus of the university or college at which they are a full-time student for the period for which they hold a study permit to study at that university or college. So they might work any post-secondary student, they may work even full-time on the campus of their school if that school is a university or college, and if they are full-time students, and if they have valid study permits. Now, the PDI also explains that there are no restrictions on the number of hours the students can work on campus in addition to working off campus. So in other words, a person can, when we say that person can work 20 hours per week, we're talking about 20 hours off campus. However, if they find a job on the campus of the school, they may also work. And we will talk about what do we mean by campus. But at the end of the day, this is a great opportunity for students. I give you an example. You probably know that I'm a graduate of York University. And on the campus of York University, we do have actually like a small shopping mall. It's a huge campus. And over there, for example, there is Subway. So can you work at the Subway sandwiches while you are also studying? Yes. How many hours? Full time. So if you get hired by the library on the campus or stores on the campus, in those situations, or by a professor on the campus, in those situations, you may work even full time, regardless of whether you are working off the campus or not. So the focus that we have in terms of the number of hours and limitations is only limited to off-campus situations, not on the campus. And again, I emphasize that you must meet all the requirements under Section 186 sub F to be able to work on the campus of the school. This means that high school students, unfortunately, do not have the permission to work on the campus of their school. In fact, they don't even have the permission to work off campus. We'll talk about it later. So we will talk about these topics. We'll explore PDI, eligibility requirements, definitions, co-op students, etc., by presenting different cases. The first thing first, you need to know that the eligibility to work off campus is defined under Section 186 sub V of the regulations. And according to this section, there are a few things that you need to meet. Number one, the person must be a full-time student. They must study at a designated learning institution or DLI, and they also need to study at a post-secondary academic, vocational, or professional training program. Now we'll talk about what do we mean by academic, vocational, or professional training. There is an exception. Also, vocational training programs at secondary level offered in Quebec could qualify. So Quebec is the only province in Canada that offers some exceptions in terms of working on the campus or off campus at the high school level. But you need to make sure that that program qualifies for vocational training program at secondary level in Quebec. And the duration of studies must be 6 months or more. So even if you hold a study permit for studying in Canada for less than 6 months, and your study permit is valid and you're studying full-time, you may still not work off campus. And then in terms of the number of hours that you can work, as mentioned under Section 186 sub V, you can work full-time during regular breaks of the school, which we'll talk about them later, and a maximum of 20 hours per week during academic sessions. Again, this is about off-campus working, because on the campus, there is no limitation. Remember that the requirements for PGWP, there's an extra P over there, the requirements for eligibility for PGWP is different from requirements of eligibility for working off campus. So for example, if you're studying at a private college, a private career college, which is a DLI, you may not qualify for PGWP, with some exceptions, but for the most part, you are not qualified for a PGWP after finishing your studies or postgraduate work permit. However, you may still work off campus. So whatever I'm talking about here and all the restrictions, they only define off-campus working. We do not focus on postgraduate work permit because the requirements for postgraduate work permit are different. Now let's do some definitions. What is academic program, professional training, etc. So in terms of academic program as defined under PDI, a post-secondary program that awards academic credentials to persons for whom the normal entrance requires is high school completion or higher. This program is often delivered at institutions that award an academic degree, diploma, or certificate, such as any of the following: universities, colleges, CEGPES, and also seminars and Institute of Technology. And then in terms of professional training, a type of training usually offered to a person who is already a professional in given field. Professional development is generally accredited. That is, it is recognized by an industry, association, or profession. Professional training can be offered by learning institutions or professional associations, regulatory bodies, or unions. For example, real estate, appraisal, production and inventory control, food service management, or specialty courses for lawyers, doctors, accountants, business administrators, engineers, dentists, teachers, and counselors. Remember, if you are going through professional training, still it must be full-time, still it must be more than 6 months, still you must hold a valid study permit, and of course, you must study at a DLI. So if you are doing professional training that doesn't fall under all of those, then off-campus work or even on the campus work is not an option. Vocational training, a preparation for a specific occupation in an industry or a trade that is generally accredited. It may be offered through on-the-job programs by unions in conjunction with businesses or employers, or by learning institutions in conjunction with a specific industry or employer. This training may include any of the following: technical training, organizational training, or basic skills training. For example, St. Clair College in Ontario, if I'm not mistaken, they offer 1-year programs for the trades, and that could be considered vocational training. Now, regulatory schedule break, what do we exactly mean? To be considered a regularly, sorry, not regulatory, regularly. To be considered a regularly scheduled break, the break must be part of the DLI's academic calendar. For instance, winter and summer holidays, reading week. So these are considered regular breaks. Each regularly scheduled break should not be longer than 150 days. The maximum cumulative duration of scheduled breaks is 180 days per calendar year. So what happens if the regular scheduled break is more than 150 days? For the first 150 days, you qualify for full-time working, and for the remainder, you cannot work at all. So you have to be very careful about this. Now, off campus, any location outside the boundaries of the campus of the educational institution at which the student is registered. So you need to identify the boundaries, and if there is a business that is outside those boundaries, then we're talking for that business means off campus. If there is a business that is inside those boundaries, then it qualifies under Section 186 sub F, meaning that the person in most situations may work full-time, assuming that they meet the requirements. Now, the ineligible programs of study that they do not qualify you for off-campus work as general interest programs, prerequisite courses for DLI enrollment, and and ESL, most ESL, FSL components. Now, what do we mean by prerequisite? For example, you want to take a master's degree in accounting, and they realize that you need to take a course in basic course, for example, in business administration before even starting the program. And if you are taking that in a semester before the main semester that you start your program, you do not qualify for off-campus work, unfortunately. Even if the number of prerequisite courses are in such a way that you're required to study full-time, you still do not qualify for work off-campus. In terms of ESL, we have, or FSL, French as a second language, or English as a second language, we are dealing with a specific situation. Sometimes the ESL program is like a prerequisite for training. So in other words, you just do your ESL course, and then it qualifies you to go to study. Unfortunately, those programs do not qualify students for off-campus working. However, if you are doing ESL as part of your training, for example, you are going to regular classes and you're also taking ESL courses simultaneously, and you meet all the requirements. It's a DLI, it's a post-secondary education, it's full-time studies, you have valid study permits. In those situations, you may work off campus. But if ESL is considered a prerequisite, then unfortunately, off-campus working is not available. And again, remember that in terms of full-time status, normally, I mean, in the past, the focus was that we consider something full-time if you are studying at least 15 hours. So in other words, you are taking at least 15 hours of classes per week. In those situations, we consider them full-time studies. The DLI has now changed stance on this slightly, and they say that the final determination in terms of what is considered full-time studies is defined by the college or university. And of course, they work with IRCC and other entities to make correct decisions on this matter. If your change from full-time to part-time studies, then generally speaking, the person is not qualified to work off campus. We have an exception. For example, if a person is at the last semester, which I will talk about that later. Now, co-op students, they when we have co-op students, they have a work permit as well. Although that work permit will allow them to work, that work permit has specific definitions and restrictions based on the agreement that the college or university has with IRCC. So assuming a student follows the requirements of that work permit in terms of co-op studies, and they are also following the requirements in terms of maintaining being a full-time student, then they can also work off campus. So just keep that in mind. A co-op work permit is not a permission to work full-time outside the campus. It's just for the specific needs of the program that you are taking with the college or university. Then simply put, although it is a little bit more complicated than that, but simply put, a person who holds a co-op work permit and they are full-time students as well, they need to follow all requirements in terms of off-campus working to be able to work off-campus as well. But working in the perimeters of the work permit designed for that co-op program is completely something else, and they can consult with their college or university as well. In terms of conditions for work, first of all, as a reminder, maximum working hours, generally speaking, when during academic sessions is only 20 hours per week. Now, recently we had a public policy that allowed some students to work full-time despite the restrictions on 20 hours per week. Those public policies, they come and go, so I don't want to cover that public policy in this video, and but you can refer to IRCC website for that public policy to see if you qualify for that or your clients qualify for that. In terms of intensive programs, it means that you usually take 3 semesters instead of 2 semesters. So even during summertime, you're studying. Unfortunately, in those situations, the student is not allowed to work full-time because summer is not considered regular break. Now, for the intensive programs, if we have a reading week and short break between 2 semesters, yes, the student may work full-time, but summer break is not summer break anymore. And as I mentioned, there is an exception for final academic session. And so assuming the student was studying full-time, and then for the last session or last semester, they couldn't take, I mean, they don't have enough number of courses to take, or they are working on their thesis or dissertation, those kind of things. Uh, Despite that, the student during the last semester, despite that they're studying part-time, but because that part-time is imposed on them on the last academic semester, they may work 20 hours per week off campus. Now, the break before the last semester, they may work full-time. So let's say I have a full-time semester, then I have summer break, and then my last semester is only 1 course. In this situation, while I'm studying full-time, the semester before the last semester, I can work 20 hours off campus. During summer break, I can work full-time. And during the last semester, I can work 20 hours off campus. So despite that, they have only 1 course, 2 courses probably during the last semester, they still cannot work full-time. But the exception allows them, despite being part-time, to work 20 hours per week and the final academic session. So this is only for the final academic session. And then regularly scheduled breaks. Again, remember that they need to maintain their full-time status to be able to work during regular scheduled breaks. As I mentioned, they can work full-time during regularly scheduled breaks. And but if they decide to take courses during regularly scheduled breaks, they may do so. That's okay. Now, sometimes adverse matters happens. For example, suddenly you're encountering school strikes, those kind of situations. Despite that, those situations, they may still work off campus because of the circumstances that are outside of their the abilities, and they can still work 20 hours off campus despite those strikes. And then again, part-time work after program completion. So this is an interesting part. It's very complicated. So let me explain this to you. So imagine that a student, international student, finishes their studies. The question is that can they continue working or not? So this is how it works. The day that they finish their studies, they do not usually receive an official letter from school immediately that you have finished the studies. So there will be a lapse between the time that they finish their studies to the time that they receive a completion letter. So from that moment to the time that they receive their completion letter, they may work 20 hours per week. Okay, so that will be a maximum of 20 hours per week off campus. So that's the duration. But sometimes, sorry, and then later they will receive the completion letter. The day that they receive the completion letter, they must stop working. They are not allowed to work. They may only work if they apply for postgraduate work permit or another type of work permit. So if they apply for a work permit after receiving their graduation letter, they may work only if they submit their application for postgraduate work permit or another kind of work permit. Now, keep that in mind that this is valid, what I said, if their study permit is still valid. So if somebody finishes their studies and the day after or 2 days or 3 days later, their study permit expires, unfortunately, they are not allowed to work in Canada. So they must apply for a visitor status or work permit even before the expiry of their study permit. And of course, if IRCC refuses the study permit, so for example, somebody applies for an extension of their study permit and they refuse their study permit application, on the day that they receive the study permit refusal, unfortunately, they cannot continue working. In terms of non-compliance, if somebody doesn't comply with the requirements that I explained, unfortunately, they could face a removal order from Canada. A typical removal order for these situations is an exclusion order, which means that they will be removed from Canada and they cannot return for at least 1 year. There will be a 1-year ban on them. There are of course, more severe consequences under Section 124 and 125 of the Act, which results into imprisonment, etc. It rarely or almost never happens for international students just because they worked off campus more than what they were supposed to do, but they could face exclusion orders, and it happens from time to time. And of course, they will lose their status in Canada as well. And of course, in the future, when they apply for another study permit or work permit and they want to come back to Canada, there will be complications because of non-compliance. Okay, now I'm going to explore 10 different scenarios of off-campus work. And if you want to jump in and answer what you think, that's okay. Of course, we are on record, but you can interact with me. That's absolutely fine. And let me know what you think. And there is no problem if you answer incorrectly. We just are exploring these scenarios. So scenario number 1 is Emily. So Emily is a full-time student at Vancouver Community College, and she has enrolled in a nursing program. She has a valid study permit, and her school is a designated learning institution. Emily is eager to gain some real-world experience and wants to work in a healthcare startup off campus. She's particularly interested in roles allowing her to apply for nursing skills such as healthcare assistant. Do you think Emily can work off campus? And if yes, for how many hours?
I believe she can, and she can work for 20 hours a week.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, the answer, she can work up to 20 hours per week during academic sessions, and she can work full-time during regular school breaks. Yeah. But of course, she needs to maintain her full-time study status. Now, the next scenario is for Raj. Raj is in his final semester at Humber College in Toronto. And again, Humber College is a DLI. Due to how his course schedule worked out, he only has 2 courses this semester, technically making him a part-time student. Raj is concerned about his off-campus work eligibility. Can Raj work off-campus? And for how many hours?
I believe he cannot because, oh, he
Oh,
can.
sorry. Yeah, he can.
Sorry.
Again, we have an exception for last semester. Okay, for the last semester, even if you're studying part-time, that's okay. You can work off campus, but only 20 hours per week. So for the last semester, they made an exception in terms of maintaining your full-time status. Okay, so that's the only exception, remember. Now, the next scenario is about Sarah. So Sarah has recently completed her master's business administration from Simon Fraser University, which by the way is a DLI. She has applied for a postgraduate work permit, but hasn't received a decision yet. Sarah is anxious to start her career and wonders if she can work while waiting.
Yes, she can.
And
Yes.
for how many hours?
Yeah.
Full time.
Very good. The answer is yes. This is actually under the authority of Section 186 sub W. So Section 186 sub W says that if you qualify to work under Section 186V, then after finishing your studies, if you submit an application for a work permit before the expiry of your study permit, then you may work full-time until a decision has been made on your work permit application. As I mentioned, that person can, and as you mentioned, can person work full-time off campus while waiting for PGWP. But they must apply for the postgraduate work permit before the expiry of their study permit. The next one. So Ahmed is an international student from Syria studying engineering at Dalhousie University, which happens to be a DLI. Due to an unfortunate turn of events back home, he loses his financial support. Ahmed is stressed and considers dropping out. Can Ahmed work if cannot continue being a full-time student?
No, he
No,
can't.
he cannot.
Yes, you're right. He cannot. However, as a destitute student, he is qualified to apply for a work permit as a destitute student, assuming that this situation was significant. So quitting studies disqualifies him from working, as you correctly mentioned. However, he might be able to apply for a work permit as a destitute student. And if he receives that work permit, then he can work in Canada, even if he doesn't study full-time. Okay, so the next one. Kim is a full-time student at a designated learning institution, currently experiencing a faculty strike. Classes have been suspended and Kim is unsure about her work eligibility. What do you think? Can she work or cannot work?
She can work 20-hour part.
Yes, very good answer. Because she is actually the strike was out of her hand, she can actually work part-time off campus, and by part-time we mean up to 20 hours per week. But she must otherwise adhere to study permit conditions. So in other words, if they are partially open and allow studies, she must continue studying in Canada. So she cannot just quit studying because of that. Now it depends on the situation. Now, ironically, I talked about my university. I had a client that applied for York University, and she got accepted. And then guess what? Suddenly, the York, I think professors and employees, they went on a strike, and they were on a strike for a duration of the summer school. So she actually registered to summer school, but she couldn't go to school because there was no school. I remember that IRCC sent her a request that whether she has complied with the requirements of study permit. And when we explained the matter to them, they backed off and they said, okay, yeah, because it was a strike, we're not worried about her not following the requirements. So the next one. Carlos has just completed a diploma in graphic design and plans to enroll in a bachelor's program at the same institution. There is a gap of 100 days between the two programs. Can Carlos work?
Yes, he can.
Okay. Yeah, assuming that his study permit is still valid, because sometimes when you enroll, your study permit is still valid and you don't need to apply for a new study permit. Or if the study permit is expiring, he must apply for a new study permit before the expiry of the study permit. But when there is a gap, and that gap between two different programs is less than 150 days, Carlos can can work in Canada. So the answer is that yes, Carlos can work full-time off campus between these two programs. However, the limitations is 150 days. So if the gap between these two programs is more than 150 days, for the first 150 days, Carlos may work full time, but as soon as he reaches the 150 days, he must stop working. So Aisha is a 17-year-old international student enrolled in a high school program. She wonders if she can work part-time to gain experience and pocket money.
In this case, she cannot because she's in high school.
Perfect. That's correct. Unfortunately, we don't have an option for international students that are high school students or primary school students to work off campus or to work at all, even on the campus. However, we recently have a new guideline and public policy by RCC. If mother or father of Aisha they are already here in Canada and they are working with a valid work permit, there is a chance she can apply for a work permit because of them. And then that will allow her to work in Canada. But unfortunately, based on her study permit, she cannot work, and you correctly answered that. The next scenario is about Maria. Maria is studying physics at York University. She has taken no courses this summer. Maria wonders if she can work during the summer break.
No, she cannot.
So the answer is yes, she can, because if you are a full-time student during summer break, and this is a regular break, you can actually work in Canada. So you can work full-time off campus during summer, assuming that this is a regularly scheduled break. So if again, as a reminder, if this was an intensified kind of or fast track, sometimes they call it, program, then unfortunately she couldn't. But because it was a regular program, she can. And there is no course load requirements for summer work. So you can work during the summer. If she wants to take one or two courses, that's okay. But taking courses or not taking courses will not affect her full-time work opportunity. So next one is Jack has finished his studies in computer science and plans to take a gap year between enrolling in a master's program. The gap is 180 days. Can Jack work?
No, he can't because it's more than 150 days.
Okay, so you are correct to a great extent, but if he enrolls immediately, for example, and he has a valid study permit or applies for an extension of the study permit before the expiry of his study permit, he can work for the first 150 days. After 150 days, he is not allowed to work. So this is how it works. So it can work for the first 150 days, but cannot work after 150 days until new program starts. And then when the new program starts, again, he must be full-time student and all those things that we discussed. And the last scenario is about Lily. Lily is a full-time student at Centennial College. Again, Centennial College is a community college in Ontario, and it's a DLI. The accelerated, or rather fast-track program, allows her to receive her diploma sooner. Nonetheless, she must study full-time all year round. Lily wonders if she can work full-time during the summer while completing her program.
She cannot because it's an intensive
Very good.
program. Yeah.
Exactly. She cannot work, but she may still work up to 20 hours off campus, but she cannot work full-time. And although it is summer, but it is not part of a regularly scheduled break. And that's why she cannot work full-time. So she may only work up to 20 hours per week and cannot work full-time during the summer. So as you can see, these scenarios are very complicated. There are so many different things that we discussed. I highly encourage you to read the text of the PDI as well and my articles. I also have the scenarios published on settler.ca, so you can go there and study them. Now, if you have any questions that want me to answer it and record it, please do so. If not, I can stop recording and then answer your other questions.